Hi, everybody. What an intro. It gets better and better. So very glad to be here and a little bit of the cool AC. Very glad to be here at this event, which seems to be bigger and better than ever, especially given the current part of the market cycle. And great attention to detail. They were even checking whether I wanted my shirt tucked in or not backstage. So congratulations to everybody who's been organizing it. So we're here to show that this whole kind of AI Web3 intersection, truly is the hottest topic, and that's, and it's not just some kind of IG or kind of Lens or Farcaster kind of meme of some description. So just I'm going to ask everybody on the panel to introduce themselves in a second, but for those who don't know me or kind of Fabric, we just strive to be selected as kind of venture contributors. This is the way we kind of look at it for sort of daring, if not maybe slightly crazy founders in the kind of open web space. And we've been going for a decade and working with, personally with folks like Near, co-investing with Jake, and Polkadot and Ramp and Immutable and Sorare and all sorts of great folks like that. I can see lots of founders are crowding around the VCs on the side here already of the panel. So what I'd like to do is to do these intros now, something short and punchy, but hopefully also kind of powerful, that also maybe explains some of the biases of your respective data sets as you train these agents out here in the audience as to how to think about you. And then we'll go back into a little kind of layout for the conversation, and then we'll kind of pass it back to the panel. So why don't we start with Alex over the end here.
Thank you. Alex Blania. So I started working on Worldcoin 3.5 years ago with Sam Altman, who is the founder and CEO of OpenAI. And right before that, I was in theoretical physics and applied AI systems to predict quantum systems. So I have like a little bit of a technical, way less than Illia has, but some technical background and a lot of thoughts on how this is going to go forward.
Hi, I'm Illia. Before the famous rabbit hole of crypto, I was for about 10 years working on machine learning and understanding natural language and knowledge, and ending up working on transformers, which is the kind of core technology powering all of the ChatGPT, Midjourney, and all of the current kind of innovation. And then through a twists and turns, end up starting Near Protocol, which is a kind of layer 1 blockchain that's focused on really bringing 1 billion users on-chain, becoming an entry point for Web3.
Thanks for having me. My name is Jake Brukhman. I'm the founder and CEO of CoinFund. We're a crypto investment firm whose mission is to champion the leaders of the new internet. And we've been doing so since 2015. About a year ago, we published our thesis on the intersection of Web3 and AI, and we've been making investments actively in that area ever since. So excited to have this conversation today.
Thanks, Jake.
Jamie Burke, CEO and founder of Outlier Ventures. We've been around for about a decade now, the world's leading Web3 accelerator, one of the most active seed-stage investors in the space. And AI has really been at the heart of our thesis. We wrote a paper back in, I think, 2017 called the Convergence thesis. And a significant part of our portfolio have been exploring that convergence, the intersection of data and Web3, AI, and blockchains. And excited to talk on the panel.
Fantastic. And so, as we heard, we sort of individually have been interested in driving this intersection for the best part of half a decade. We've got kind of, more than half a decade of kind of crypto OG activity here, as well as even, LLM transformer activity. So I think it's fantastic to have this kind of panel here. So we could ask the question, what is the essence of why this matters, the intersection? And one way of thinking about Web3 is that it's about weighing up and balancing the interests of sovereign individuals with free markets and with the collective good. And we all know that if you're kind of trying to weigh up and balance and manage good relationships, trust is important. If the trust is gone, your relationship can be toast. So a trust layer of some description is required, something that can get a grip around the identity of individuals, of humans, but also the identity of data and creations in some sense. So I think if we assume that's correct, We also have the question of like, well, should that be centralized, or is it absolutely essential that it is decentralized and not beholden to one individual, God forbid, or even one individual government? So on that topic, I want to pass over to Jamie, who, as he said, has been talking about and thinking about this theory for a long period of time, and unpack some of those questions.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if you look pre-Ethereum, or at least early Ethereum, a lot of the language, if you go back in the time machine, a lot of the language was talking about truly smart contracts. It was talking about truly autonomous DAOs. And so that's always been at the core of this essence of Web3. And of course, if we're really thinking about the next phase of the web, you can't not think about AI being at the heart of that. And for us, equally, you couldn't look at blockchains in isolation, which led us to come up with the Convergence thesis. But actually, that was just informed by a lot of the innovations that we were seeing happen. Actually, a lot of my thinking was influenced by somebody called Trent McConaughey of Ocean Protocol, investment that we share. We were kind of friends and family around at the time, who was the first person I met who was an AI person, a legit AI person, 2 exits under his belt, who was coming into the world of Web3, even though we weren't calling it that at the time, from the perspective of somebody who was thinking about designing the future of AI. And that opened up a lot of questions that led us to make several investments beyond Ocean into Fetch.ai and a number of others, where effectively blockchains were going to enable the commodification of data, and of course, what was going to be consuming that was going to be AI. That led us to begin to think about the direction of travel that could take that would be different to the world of Web 2, which was slightly kind of more monolithic and centralized in terms of platforms. So from our perspective, we've always kind of thought of this leading towards agent-based systems. And then the question comes, well, how are those agent-based systems owned, controlled? How do they serve individuals, enforce their sovereignty, but also operate at a collective level, maybe or maybe not leveraging DAOs? And so I think that raises a lot of interesting questions about value creation, value exchange, and value ownership, and offers a potential paradigm where that's going to be more equitable than the world of Web 2. And I know that's probably something kind of we all share as a general framework.
Any concrete examples from your portfolio that you want to cite?
Yeah, I mean, I think Fetch.ai is probably the better one or the more mature one. They have originally come at it from a kind of industrial context. Again, a lot of the early thinking, at least in Europe, from the kind of early Ethereum community, was very much looking at the machine-to-machine economy. So already thinking about blockchains as being a means through which machines can transact with one another, make microtransactions, obviously always on the assumption that there'll be kind of these scaling solutions. And so they do a lot of work with industrial organizations like Bosch, for example, on open mobility systems, where effectively, if you're going to have autonomous vehicles navigating the world, how do they pass information between one another, transact? And of course, that gets even more complex when you think of the user's experience, which is probably going to be multimodal transportation. So you might start up in a car, but you then might get on a train, you might take a plane. How do all these things organize around you as the user? And their vision is that through this kind of distributed or decentralized marketplace of highly specialized agents.
Yeah. So we're going to come back to that question of machine-to-machine interaction, and even sort of just software agent to software agent, and also just to think about this whole supply chain of the creativity that AI can now sort of generate. How do we know that we can trust it? There are going to be elements throughout the supply chain, from the training through to the proof of persons and so forth, that we need to address. One area that's popped out of trying to address some of those challenges is ZKML, the combination of machine learning with with zero-knowledge proofs. Those are sort of two pieces of wizardry. And so I'm going to turn to Jake to talk about what is the state of the art there? What has he got excited actually happening? And what are the kind of shortcomings as he currently sees it?
Absolutely. Well, zero-knowledge proofs are a technology that, among other things, enable verifiable computation. And where this is finding the most product market fit and actual use cases in today's market is actually within blockchain applications. Like historically, blockchains and other decentralized networks have been fairly low-power computers. And when it comes to doing intensive computations, the tendency is we want to take that off-chain. But in doing so, that computation becomes performed by a third party. So how do we trust this third party? How do we know that they're performing the calculation that we're paying for and that they're doing it correctly? There's been a bunch of solutions to this problem over time, but zero-knowledge proofs have turned out to be a really precise solution. And so essentially what happens is this third party performs your computation and then provides a proof that it was done well. What we're seeing in the market is that this off-chain computation, one of the most prominent use cases of it has been in AI. And there's a lot of people right now who are working on the problem of training models. So in other words, creating models in a decentralized context on decentralized networks. And there are people who are working on the problem of inference of models, meaning using ZK to show the outputs of models and to be able to use those outputs within smart contracts. So ZKML is sort of the broad field of applications that's using zero-knowledge proofs, essentially bring AI on-chain.
Exactly. So the different steps in the supply chain that ZK can be used to make sure that we can actually, if we go out there and we want to get a result from AI, we know that we can trust that the training was done on a certain data set and that a certain model was then used to deliver us our result, and we can trust the output to then do whatever we want in the kind of next stage of that sort of data supply chain, if you will, or insight supply chain. So, I mean, we're talking here about kind of large language models. Illia was instrumental and author of the paper back in 2017, Tension's All You Need, about transformers. And so what I thought would be interesting to do is to try and unpack this sort of dichotomy we've got between the incredible power of these new large language models and the challenge this creates in this data supply chain we're talking about. So maybe you want to kind of dig into that, Illia. And again, favorite examples of where we're actually seeing code, in operation in this convergence.
Yeah. So the way to think about large language models is it's something that kind of like deep learning in general is very expressive, right? And it's able to capture a lot of knowledge, but kind of historically we're struggling to train this at scale and struggling to get it to actually work in production. So the reason why, for example, like transformers came around is because we were actually not able to launch what was the technology stack before on Google.com because it was just too slow. It was would take like seconds to actually run inference, even at smaller models that were running back then, and Google just cannot do that. And so the kind of what transformers as a model allows to do is just really align well with the current kind of silicon we have, right? With this parallel processing kind of graphics units that specifically NVIDIA produces, but also now there's other companies. Now, what fundamentally happened, though, through the work of OpenAI, especially, is this transition from you have a human in the loop, right, that needs to input information and then process output and interpret it and explain it to everybody else, to a new way of interacting with computing where these models themselves are able to communicate with people, even at scale, right, by, for example, posting on one of these social platforms. And that kind of fundamentally shifted a lot of the things that before we would assume about computing, and that's why all this conversation started around, well, what does this mean for humanity? What does this mean for kind of media, for content, for all those things? Now, the kind of from perspective of where these things starting to intersect, right? And we mentioned about identity and reputation is really important to understand how kind of this output came around, right? So if this is an output of a model and we want to prove it, right, that's important with ZK. If this is an input data that goes into a model, we also want to know where it's coming from. But at the end, as a consumer, what you want to know is that whatever you're looking at is actually associated with some reputation, right? And right now, we actually kind of, as a society, moved to, like we had non-secure communications through HTTP, and we kind of converged into HTTPS, into secure encrypted communication with websites, because we wanted to trust the content we see from the website is coming from this website and not being intercepted in the middle, right? And so similar thing needs to happen on the level of the kind of content, not just website, where as you see through on some book, on some blog post, into a video, YouTube video, podcast, you want to know that it was produced by the people it says it produced, and that kind of this reputation has association. And so this is where the kind of blockchain technology is a very important tool, because it enables us to use kind of a lot of the cryptography primitives, but then root them into some level of trust, right? Continue to aggregate reputation across multiple instances of content production, such that when you look at some piece of content, you can see what are the other pieces or what are the other interactions have happened. And we see a lot of this happening across decentralized social media, becoming kind of the the driver for this, as well as some of the media companies are starting to think about how to adopt this.
So good. So we've got software that can talk to software. We can then trust the output of that. Then we can know when information has come from humans. We can then trust that we understand where it's come from and how it can be connected to their reputation. Some part of the link in that chain or value system or whatever has got to be the connection to the people themselves and proof of personhood. And I think Alex and his work with Worldcoin and Tools for Humanity is very well positioned to talk about that. So ultimately, when you think about all those elements together, we can envision, looking back from 5, 10, 20 years in the future, new ways, totally new ways in which we're going to organize ourselves and our lives. And hopefully, maybe we'll come back to the question of who's on top, humans and machines, in a minute. In that context, governance is extremely critical, and how you possibly use all of these elements to enhance, ultimately, democracy. I mean, one could argue that maybe that isn't a very high bar to make a democracy as desirable as it is, better than it is today. But love to hear you kind of unpack that and how that might, the different techniques, the different tools being used, and anything else you want to cite as an example. Go, Alex.
Sure. So I think as Illia just described, we believe proof of personhood itself is going to be a fundamental primitive that we are going to need on the internet for a lot of different reasons. One of them is just verifying online that we are actually humans, and that will be important for many contexts. Like I think Elon talks a lot about this on X or Twitter about bots. So these bots, what has changed is they will become much more sophisticated and much smarter. And of course, we can rely on government systems for that, but that will not work globally, and we probably should not do that. And I think crypto actually has a way to build reputation systems, to build proof of personhood systems that work truly global and decoupled from government. So this was one of the big motivations where we started working on it. But then going a little bit in the future, which was obviously a big part why Sam started this company in the first place, is democratic governance over very powerful models and very powerful systems. Because right now, just taking OpenAI as an example, there's a small team of engineers sitting in San Francisco making very consequential decisions. And these decisions will become more and more consequential. And that is just one cultural context. This is just one small team. And one of the main things that I think crypto can help with, and likely will, is how to democratize the access and the decisions over these very important parameter changes and step changes that we're going to see in the coming years. And then of course, another one that is always a little bit controversial, but we also believe will happen, is the chance to implement some kind of wealth redistribution UBI, because you will have a lot of singular entities that will create a lot of economic impact and power, and distributing that with the world is going to be critical. So these are some of the motivations that drive us.
Thanks, thanks, Alex. I mean, I think maybe you can think about whether we can start to do the math on how much one could earn from UBI, given the, I mean, because that can be challenging, but if you want to, we can talk about that. But, you know, it's good to hear that one of the intersection points between Web3 and AI is the fact that over the last decade, necessarily there's a lot of work being done on decentralized governance, because it's one of those core tenets within Web3, and that now can come across into AI. Nonetheless, there are a lot of challenges in making things like DAOs actually work. And I know that, Illia, you've been exploring opportunities to use, you know, AI agents to actually, you know, turbocharge the capabilities of DAOs. So maybe you want to drill into that, and then we'll move back this direction. So Jake, you're primed.
Yeah, I think, I mean, kind of blockchain's history has been a big experiment on governance, right? Because on one side, we have created technology that is designed to coordinate humans through protocols by defining, you know, a set of incentives and, you know, potentially a mission, and getting people to be kind of contributing into that. At the same time, as that mission becomes less nebulous from produce more blocks, it becomes harder and harder to do that. And so we've, you know, the decentralized autonomous organizations, DAOs, have come up as a tool to organize that. But we've kind of went through a few hype cycles of DAOs at this point, and we've seen that they don't fully function because we still have people in a loop that need to coordinate this and need to play the roles that are very similar to the roles in regular organizations, but they're lacking all the tools that regular organizations have, from like hiring people to firing people to being able to like do performance management. And so kind of the reality is that like we have a lot of the kind of fundamental instruments that on blockchain are really good at allocating resources, having transparency, being able to kind of inspect reputation now of people who are participating kind of from the perspective of this mission, but we don't have this coordination kind of execution. And we relied on humans, and kind of people are way better at doing things than at coordinating large masses of people. And so the idea here, like, can we start using some of this AI technology, and specifically kind of the agent-focused AI that is now kind of serves as this execution / like executive of the organization, right? They can be able to have all of the context of all of the things that happen. They be able to onboard new people, give them the context, provide them the swim lane where they should be contributing, provide information and kind of reports to all the stakeholders, and still be able, kind of under the oversight of the governance of people that are kind of set up this mission, or, you know, participate in a token or whatever the way to coordinate that. And so that idea, I think, is A, how to revitalize DAOs, but B, I think generally is moving us in the direction where like AI is now serving the function that people are inherently bad at, and as well they provide kind of this context and information. And I think there's an interesting like philosophical question here, which is, you know, people like, oh, AI will take over the world, and this is bad, versus my statement here is actually economically we will choose to work for AIs, you know, in some form of shape, and it will be better for the whole kind of humanity because it's more effective to coordinate people that way.
Will we still have the rage quit opportunity if we choose to work for AIs and then we find out that we don't like that anymore?
You can rage quit into another AI.
Certain options. Look, this is going to obviously prove to be absolutely critical debate, closed versus open AI. You know, there is this sort of gravitational force that, you know, within AI that tends to centralize the data sets, and if we don't have a way of kind of balancing that out, it's going to be probably quite hard to resist. Before we move on to the question of kind of improved economic coordination, specifically driven by, you know, concrete use cases in this space. I know Jamie wanted to build on this DAO point.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess if you kind of pose the question, who are blockchains for? I would argue it's probably not people in the day-to-day use of them, right? So what are DAOs for? If you imagine that actually blockchains and DAOs are best used by agents, they respond very well to logic, unlike people. They respond very well to incentives. People sometimes do, people sometimes don't. And actually, the really interesting thing about Web3, if you think about its principles and why you would want those principles as part of the DNA of the future of AI, is they have the potential to reconcile things that have been at odds with one another for the last 100+ years, which is free markets, collectivism, and the sovereignty of the individual. And Web3 has the potential to harmonize those three things in terms of collectivism, a form of fluid collectivism, but that respects the individual. But again, if we're going to have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, billions of tokens, incentives coordinating these networks, these games, I want my agent to play these games on my behalf. I don't want to be having to make these transactions and swapping various tokens. I just want to live my life. And so that's kind of the perspective that we come at when we think of AI.
And so when we were kind of having a chat in preparation for this, if you take that notion of an agent that can understand your risk appetite and your resources and then make economic decisions on your behalf to kind of optimize yield given a certain risk. If you take that atomic unit, we could dream about actually doing a better job than the economists currently do at the absolute macro level and the global macro level. So Jake, I don't know whether you want to kind of build on what's happening today in that space and where we think it's going on-chain AI.
Well, I'm not sure that if we yet have startups that are doing global economic central planning, but I guess the seed of the idea is that we often put forward kind of capitalism, right, as the best societal mechanism to create commerce and products and society, really, right? But if we take a sort of dispassionate view of capitalism, there's also a lot of waste. I mean, think about the typical venture portfolio, right, where 24 out of the 25 companies go to zero and one returns the fund. And on the other side of the spectrum, we have sort of the classical communist central planner who we also know doesn't work. So maybe the seed of the idea here is, can we find a middle ground there where there's a planner, but the planner is so intelligent and so all-seeing of the details of the economic activity that is happening that they're actually, to your point, Illia, are able to coordinate economically in a far superior way. And maybe this idea of agents, right, is kind of a starting point there. One of the really cool things we're seeing in the market right now as an application of AI Web3, at least I'm seeing this more than anything else, is the application of AI to financial strategies. And this is, in a way, kind of a financial planner that works on your behalf, looks at your view of the market or of, I don't know, yield protocols in DeFi, whatever the case might be, and says, this strategy for you right now is going to deliver kind of an optimal return. And so there's a macro view, there's also this bottom-up view of planning as well.
So I'm definitely a born optimist, and I get excited by this notion that we can do a better job of managing the economy for everyone and reach a kind of new optimum. But it does, interestingly, if you build it in this emergent fashion from all of these agents with our individual interests at heart and in a very narrow way first, but then we combine it, it then speaks to the challenge of composition across this environment, because we want to know that those narrow data sets that are having narrow objectives are actually based on the correct data and so forth, and that the outcomes can be interpreted by other agents. So there are still challenges, as to your point, to make this work effectively. So I actually forget whether I was told whether we were allowed to take any questions to the audience, but I'm going to provoke you to come up with some anyway, and maybe we can. You can shout them, and we can repeat them. But in these last few minutes, we're going to kind of attack, I guess, a little bit. And talk about the topic that sort of governments seem to care most about in this context, and a guess about how perhaps, understandably with our own biases, the Web3 community thinks that we can contribute to what is termed as a kind of AI safety, thinking about the alignment with the objectives that we have, make sure human and machine objectives are aligned. And there's a big summit coming up in the UK in November, run by the government, a global one, and I hope it's as inclusive as possible. But so maybe everyone in the panel, while the audience thinks of questions, wants to just talk about how do we envisage this shift where agents, say, might have to be clear on the bias inherent in their data sets, to take responsibility for the outcomes that they suggest to other agents and to people, and the liability that might go with that, and then perhaps be involved autonomously in negotiating insurance around that. Did you misdiagnose some health condition? Did you misdirect some financial strategy? Who wants to go first in some thoughts on this topic? Go, Illia.
I can start. I think there's two sides of the problem here. There's one side which is, this is agent or this is model that I use or represents me, and I want it to behave with whatever my expectations are, right? And that is currently more what, let's say, OpenAI and others are solving, where they present it as a product, right? So they kind of have this as something that represents their company, and they need to make sure that that behaves in a way that align with their company values, and at the same time doesn't do harm. Now, if you look at it from a global perspective, though, I think the reality is it's not the AI safety problem. It's actually the kind of human alignment question that we need to solve, because the challenges of generative content, fake news, they all span to beginning of humanity, right? In Web3, we actually have Byzantine fault tolerant as a core because there was a misinformation, in Byzantine army, and they were trying to figure out how to adjust for that, right? So we literally, the whole field is based on kind of misinformation and malicious actors. And so the reality is, it's a human problem of having malicious actors, and AI and this language model and generative content is a new tool that allows to kind of do it at scale. And so what we really need is actually a new way of kind of structuring society that is more akin to how we structure protocols in Web3 than how we do it right now, where it's a lot of paperwork and language rules and kind of all of the things that AI is really good at kind of manipulating and creating lots and lots of demagogue content, which can go and argue. I think the Good Will Hunting movie is really good, where he's in court and he's citing some 1800s precedent with a cart to get him out of jail. This is what AI will be using, right? It's some weird edge cases in language to pretty much present this. And so we need to start adjusting the kind of the framework under which the humanity is operating to actually be able to have AI agents and humans working together in a coherent way. And then, we still need what is a global optimal function, right? This goes to if there is so much value created in this AI, how are we going to be distributing it? How is it going to be operating? All of these questions kind of build on top of that as well. But I think this is where this duality needs to be clear, that there's a human kind of, I call it society operating system, that needs to reboot. And then there is a local, hey, I'm using a model and I want to know it's correct for my requirements, right? How do we test that?
So maybe that's a good segue. I don't want to rise to that challenge. How much could a citizen in this new society operating system earn, and what would they have to do other than give up their biometrics in order to earn it? Hazard some numbers?
We don't have numbers, but I think the very simple model is whatever, economic output increases by 5% every year, and you have some linear function that ramps up. I think within the next 10 to 20 years, we will see, at least for some groups of people, actually have UBI play out. So I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to be really exciting. And I think other than just the UBI question, I agree very much with Illia. that I think the one main thing that crypto can really do is that it can help us to build societal tools to arrange ourselves with this new technology.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Any comment here on these questions of alignment, liability, insurance?
Well, one thing that I'd like to add to the discussion, I think, is just kind of a general view of alignment from a Web3 perspective. And the Web3 perspective is openness. And actually, in the broader AI space, we also see a very clear trend that openness and open source development is creating a lot of innovation, a lot of technological advancement, and solving and optimizing a lot of the technology around AI. And yet, when we think about alignment, most of the big companies that work on alignment think about it from a closed perspective. They have a parental view that they will protect us from AI in a way. And what I think these companies are really saying is that we think that 50, maybe 100 people can solve this problem in a proprietary way. And I think the Web3 view on that would be that we should open up the technology and we should have thousands of people working this problem, or tens of thousands of people working this problem, because that is actually the way that it may be solved effectively and from all angles. And so this is why I am in an intersection of AI and Web3. I think Web3 primitives could add meaningfully to that story.
I think it's a brilliant point.
Open source always wins.
Yeah, the openness and transparency is not only the greatest disinfectant, but it's the way of tapping into the greatest pool of talent that you can possibly have, which we're going to need in this context. I think that's a super important principle. Before we wrap up, anything more, Jamie?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just kind of close off on the point. I think, when we're talking about protocols in the context of AI, we're talking about, and especially with Web3, to what extent can we codify legal, social protocols into actual technical protocols that can operate independently, can be coordinated in a distributed manner. And so, questions around personhood, most people don't fully comprehend, but there are already precedents in the US. Like, a corporation is actually technically a person. It has personhood in a US context. And, there are already constructs offshore, for example, where you can have ownerless corporations. And so it's going to be interesting to see how a lot of these legal concepts then get transferred into AI, and how they can be codified by leveraging decentralized protocols.
Brilliant. So, from my perspective, we've always been excited at how Web3 can allow us to scale the trust we used to have in the village up to a global scale, and that perhaps now, in combination with AI, we can scale the intelligence so that we can deal with the opportunities and challenges of operating that global village in a way that is going to deliver better economics, more harmony, lots of utopian visions like that. But thanks so much to the panel, and thanks to the audience for your attention. Sorry we didn't get any questions, but if you want to come and talk to us, unfortunately we're out of time, I'm being told here, but if you want to come and talk to us afterwards, I'm sure there will be a slot. Thanks so much.